Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to the Castle of Horror interview segment where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds from Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, co-creator of the steampunk graphic novel Clockworks, about a woman leading a team of mech pilots in Victorian London out in paperback from Humanoids this September, actually literally next week. Today, we're talking to Leanna, Renee, Hieber about her new book, Eterna and Omega, which is also Victorian. Interestingly enough, it is the second book in the Victorian gaslamp, and that's quotation. We're going to ask you about that. Gaslamp adventure series that began with the Eterna Files. In this series, the New York City contends with London in a secret spiritual battle of mediums and spies between the paranormal investigative teams of the Eterna Commission and the Omega Department. And in this book, representatives of both teams, Clara Templeton and Rose Everhart, finally meet only to discover in one another a strange mirror of themselves. Leanna, Hieber, I'm going to ask you all about that. But first, welcome, and welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you are. Also, I note in my bio that I have you. It says one of your first books is a foundation of the gaslamp fantasy genre, and you were also a finalist for the Daphne du Maurier Award. I have two thoughts about that, and the second one is going to be, do you love Daphne du Maurier? But you don't have to answer that if for some reason.
Oh, no. I want to talk about my love of Daphne du Maurier and all of the great Gothic novelists, and she is among many of those inspirations to me. So absolutely, when I finaled in that, just something that bore her name, I was so excited by that, just because her, she's just an icon, and it's hard when it's genre fiction. It's hard to sort of encapsulate the genre within one author, but I think she did it for the modern 20th century better than just about anybody. So yeah. I was really, really thrilled about that. And it also, because of, Tor has put her name on my book, because of being a finalist for the award, it helps me have a shorthand with people about the type of atmospheres I'm looking to create in my books, and I'm really, really grateful for that.
Oh, of course. No, that makes total sense. It's so funny. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, "Boy, I'm reading Jamaica Inn, and it is amazing. This whole setting on the rocks of the shore, and there's ships, and there's evil, plotters and planners and schemers, and just this foreboding Gothic atmosphere." And she was like, "Well, yeah, but would it translate today? Would people be able to get Jamaica in?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? This is Daphne du Maurier. Her voice is a modern voice. Yes. It's the 1930s, but it is a way modern voice. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
We jumped ahead, though. You are writing something, and you've already hinted, hey, I'm going for the feel of du Maurier, for instance, and going for the feel of Gothic. But this new term, gaslamp fantasy, and it is, to me, a fairly new term. Mm-hmm. Lay it on me. Like, what does that mean?
Well, it's definitely something that my publisher, Tor, who I am really blessed to be with, or the house I always wanted to publish with when I was growing up and really thinking, I really need to write books, because if I don't write books, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. So when Tor was trying to distinguish between the different types of historical fantasy, and they were finding that with everyone associating Victorian fantasy with steampunk, the problem in that is that for me, I do not have the sci-fi elements that constitute a steampunk. So steampunk, and I'm very active in the steampunk scene, and I love the steampunk community, and I'm very, very active there. I do steampunk conventions all across the nation every year, and they're my go-to, and it's definitely my people. In terms of my writing, I'm writing a Victorian setting, but with fantasy elements, not sci-fi elements. So if people are looking for gadgets, and they're looking for airships and other technological innovations that are steam-powered, you're not going to find that necessarily in my books. You're going to find fantastical things. You're going to find people that solve their problems with magic and spiritualism and with ghosts giving them information, rather than it being something that is technologically powered. I love science fiction. I love watching it, reading it. It's just not my voice. My voice is a fantasy voice, and it always has been since my very earliest days of writing. And I think you just find what your voice is most comfortable with and the genre elements that you're most comfortable with. And I've always just leaned on that fantasy, because in that I can then really more easily go into that very rich, very lyrical atmosphere that the Gothic is so known for. And so those genre elements blend. And so when Tor was taking on a lot of historical fantasy, and one of the reasons I wanted to publish with them is because they really do know what to do with historical fantasy. It's a tricky subgenre. It's hard because it is cross genre. It's going to be some people's cup of tea and not others. So you really kind of need to know what you're doing in terms of how to market it. So when Queen Victoria's Book of Spells, which is an anthology that I'm very, very honored to be in, when that came out a few years back, that's edited by the great Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling, masters of anthologies. And they, I was so grateful to have a chance to participate in that anthology. And the subtitle is Queen Victoria's Book of Spells, a collection of gaslamp fantasy. And that was the first time that had really been on a book cover, really stating the delineation between steampunk and gaslamp fantasy. And so that... Well,
also, it does another good thing, though, because not only does it differentiate from steampunk, but it also, steampunk would be awesome. That would be the P-Funk all-stars,
exactly.
But they would, have monocles and stuff. Mm-hmm. But, no, this Gaslamp also says this is fantasy, but it's not dragons, and it's not, and it's not lords and ladies. Well, not that kind of lords and ladies. It's not
exactly. It's not. Yeah, you're going with the great thing about using the word gaslamp is it automatically gives you one of the most important setting aspects of it, which is the lighting and the atmosphere. It's literally a lighting cue, and that is so vital for me. I do come from a theatrical background, and the theatrical background is my work is visual and it's very light driven, and I think that the period atmosphere is so easily portrayed, almost better than anything, with lighting and costuming. And so those are two aspects that I really, really focus on in my work. And if anything were to be theatrically adapted, I would say, you know what, you can skimp on anything in terms of the budget except for lighting and costumes, because I feel like you could do so much with everything else, So
can you think of any? I know that you watch some TV, you watch some movies. Can you think of any films that capture this sort of look that you're talking about?
Yes, in fact, I am a panelist on panels all around the nation, most recently Dragon Con, talking about the corollaries on film and television for gaslamp fantasy. And the most recent television parallel is Penny Dreadful.
Oh, yeah.
And I was known at Dragon Con recently to go on quite a rant and tear about the ending of Penny Dreadful, which I won't spoil it for your audience, but I do find that the way that Penny Dreadful ended was a terrible betrayal of its main character. And I found it to be deeply, deeply, deeply problematic. And so I wrote a post, a long-form post, not just, which expanded on my Twitter rants that happened after I watched it. And then so I was approached by some bloggers saying, could you actually come long-form and talk about this on our platforms? And so I explained why it was problematic. But in essence, Penny Dreadful is there's a lot to love about that show, and it's beautifully done.
I've heard that.
Tremendously acted. They're some of the best television performances I have ever seen in that cast, and there's a whole lot to love about it. It's gorgeous, it's dark, it's haunting, it's terrifying. So it's definitely an old school Gothic horror show, and I really loved what they were doing with it. When you're writing for a modern audience, you can't just rehash 19th century tropes. And pick and choose which you're going to subvert and which you're not, because if you don't subvert some of those things, it's really, really, really flawed and harmful for a modern audience. And
what do you
so
mean by that? That sounds interesting. I want to chase that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
More things. So really quickly, just to set up, when I think of Gothic, when I think of when you say Gothic literature to me, first of all, the first thing that pops into my head is women running from houses. Okay,
exactly.
Because there was in this country a genre that has died. All right. I mean, I'd love to see it come back. Maybe it is coming back through fantasy, but there was a genre of, and every single book was based on the Mistress of Melon. Yeah, the Mistress of Melon, which was based on Rebecca. Is every single one of them a woman, fairly youngish and single and not rich and not poor, winds up in a subservient role in a big-ass house to a mean-ass, mysterious man who she saves and transforms into a better person. That's it. The rest is is mystery.
No, completely. That was like the 20th century iteration of the Gothic novel, because if you think about, Northanger Abbey, that's very much, if you think about the monk, if you think about the Castle of Otranto, the original Gothics, and if you think about the setting in which something like Frankenstein was written, and you think about Jonathan Harker going to Castle Dracula, all of these various things, but the visuals of the girl running away from house, that was really codified during like the 80s. And in fact, I hope that Charles Rutledge will listen to this. He's a dear friend of mine, and he's a great author, and he and I and some other people have talked about creating an anthology called Girls Running Away from Houses about this trope and about the classic Gothic, the modern Gothic, and where we want Gothic to go in the future. And so now that I've said this out loud in public.
What needs to be subverted? I agree with you that something needs to be subverted, but how? Where is Gothic going if it's not there anymore?
Well, and I've talked about this on a panel recently. Derek Tatum, who's the horror track director at DragonCon, him and I and author Sherry Priest, a steampunk great, and she's also a fellow Gothic novelist. Her recent Gothic just came out, The Family Plot, which is a fantastic modern Gothic, modern Southern Gothic. It's a beautiful, beautiful tale. And so we were on a panel. In addition to my business partner and collaborator, Tom Truelove, we've all collectively as a group been wrestling with this term called dreadpunk, which is kind of thinking, okay, you've got steampunk and you've got gaslamp fantasy. Well, what about dreadpunk? It's like Victorian horror. And we throw in the punk there because we want to make sure that, that there's still an idea of questioning establishment that comes in there, and the core of the Gothic is dread, and so the idea of dreadpunk is what's our modern niche, a modern author niche for when we're writing Victorian horror. And I think the important thing to subvert it is if you're dealing with things, especially in the Gothic, that are problematic, it's all about the power struggles and who is in power and who is not. And in the traditional Gothic, women were victims and plot devices with very limited agency. So my entire purpose as a Gothic novelist is to allow for women to have more say in what is happening to them and go after fixing their problems themselves and or with a team and partnership. I'm not talking about, somebody just going it alone. That's often the stupidest thing to do, but making smart alliances and also making self-assured decisions for themselves.
Well, in fact, in this book, you've got two main characters or the two main characters are women. Oh, and you're crackling a little bit, but you were clear for most of the time. So I don't even know what to tell you. Get near a window, I don't know. But tell me about the two main characters, one American, one British, in Eterna and Omega.
Well, I have Clara Templeton, who is a sensitive. She has always been able to receive messages from the spirit world, and she's very energy sensitive. She can go into a place and feel that it is haunted and feel that it is either possessed of a negative energy or a positive energy. And unfortunately for her, her sensitivities do have a certain they backfire a bit. If she is overwhelmed by spirits or overwhelmed by a negative energy, her body will go into an epileptic seizure.
Honest to God seizures.
Yes.
Teeth
Honest to
chattering.
goodness.
Right,
Yes.
and that's happening at the beginning of the book, in fact.
Correct, exactly so. But she does not let that condition stop her from being a part of the Eterna Commission, which is basically the whole premise for the Eterna Files series was me wanting to create an X-Files department in 1882. It's simple as that. That is what I wanted to do. And I wanted to have a lot of office politics, as you'll see with my cast of characters, because I have, not only do I have two strong female leads who are watching this mirror, but we also have two very different strong male leads in positions of power around them, working in concert with them as capable colleagues and teammates, and a whole subset of wildly diverse characters that are quirky and fun and all over the map. And they're representing really, truly the metropolis that is both New York and London, which was full of such rich talent and still is across every race, creed, sexual orientation spectrum, and socioeconomic class. And I really try and hit all of those various levels, all brought together by this commonality of the paranormal problem. And so for me, a great way to subvert some of the, to empower some of my characters that would not have had power in the Victorian era is to sort of say all bets are off when it comes to the paranormal, because this is outside of what is common practice in polite society. And it really allows
people their misunderstandings of the era is just a matter of what was presented to them in pop culture, or what has made it in pop culture now means that we've lost a view of certain things that just weren't presented in pop culture, or I could phrase it a different way. What do people misunderstand about the Victorian era that you would love to open their eyes to?
Well, one of the things I love about the Victorian era is that it's just a lot more complicated than anyone realizes. When you start digging into the layers of the Victorian psyche, it is a very polarized psyche. You have a very repressive, restrictive society where a very small percentage of the white male wealthy population is making decisions for everyone, to the point of there being a whole lot of rules that were being laid down at a time when everything was changing. So you have more happening in 40 years than in 400 years prior, with people moving from the countryside to the big city. With the advent of industrialization, we have all the onset of our modern era and our modern conveniences, between whether it's plumbing or lighting or any of the various socioeconomic systems that we rely on today. All of this was being started and fought for in the Victorian era. And you have a mobile middle class. You have a whole lot more of a globalization happening with expanded trade routes. And you have a lot of optimism and invention and innovation, but you also have a lot of fear of all of these changes. And so the Victorians were a proud people and a terrified people. And when you're proud and scared, that can create a very, very terrifying backlash against civility sometimes. For all of its prim and proper exterior, there was such a dark underbelly, colonialism's fist, whether it was Native American genocide here or whether it was Britain going and conquering everywhere. There was beauty and richness, but there was grandeur besides squalor in every major city, from rural to urban. You have the gap between the rich and the poor was ever widening, and there were social problems and conditions that people just were not equipped to handle. So a lot of the things that we read now, when we read the Victorians, we're usually reading some of their most popular pop fiction. We're reading the paranormal stuff. We're reading, I look at Frankenstein and Dracula as two sort of bookends of the era, because you have Frankenstein at the beginning of the 1800s and you have Dracula at the end of the 1800s. And in between all of that, you have a wide range of other things that terrify the Victorians. And that's what we're still reading today because it's still relevant, because fear of change is so human, and we can understand that so much.
There's so many wonderful, by the way, ghost stories. One thing I really love about the nature of our public domain, right, where stuff just falls into the ability to be re-anthologized over and over again, is that there are anthologies I've been picking up since I was a kid that feature short stories and short fiction and some novels from that turn of the century, from right at the end of the Victorian and the beginning of the Edwardian era. And what's so fascinating to me is how both recognizably modern the language is, and how modern a lot of the professions are, right? Somebody will be a lawyer, somebody will be a journalist, he'll be an investor, he'll be a whatever. But how sort of trapped and constantly struggling with mores and customs they are. It's cool. It's really neat, to see this. It does look like a bunch of people on an edge of change with no idea what's coming next.
Absolutely.
But, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The conflict is against that. Is against the society that was creating so many rules that they could hardly keep up with.
Right.
And whenever you create so many rules, it causes this, a certain amount of rebellion. So the Victorian underbelly was rife with hypocrisy and fascinating, titillating things that are really fun to explore. And the ghost story was just so prevalent in the 19th century for many reasons. A lot of it was that for all the innovations of the Victorians, they could not find the cure for death. And I play on that in my book, in my series. They couldn't find the cure for death. For all their mechanized inventions, mass sickness and infant mortality rates were really high, and women dying in childbirth was really high, and death was really prevalent and everywhere. And the idea of being able to talk to the dead and the rise of spiritualism in this country, which really exploded after the Civil War, when people were grieving so many hundreds of, this country had never seen anything like it, and the world really hadn't on that scale ever. So there's so many other things that why the ghost story becomes a very important part of the Victorian comfort ritual also. And it's also both comforting and terrifying because ghosts are of us and yet they are not. And so that's also deeply relatable. They are the most relatable of all of the great monsters of our literature, and because they're also not monsters, they're sometimes our relatives. So it's I love how rich the ghost story culture was of the 19th century. Every major writer was writing at least one ghost story, and just like you mentioned, compiled in some really wonderful anthologies. And so if you have a favorite author, from that time period, I encourage everybody to look them up and find out what ghost story they may have written for Charles Dickens magazine, because they had them done at least one, because that's sometimes what their bread and butter.
Oh yeah. Well, I was going to ask about though if you could relate that to, because you talked about your British character and her struggles, and you went into the office politics, which is fun to reveal, right? But she stands apart from an American counterpart. And so, what's the American character about?
So you've got these. You have Clara and Rose, who are very committed to their work. They're working women at a time when working women was not common. There were areas in which women could work, and being sort of secretarial was vaguely appropriate at certain stages. So both Rose and Clara, on the British and the American side, respectively, are in pseudo-secretarial roles, but they take on much more than that, and all of their colleagues know that they're much more than that between them. But they still are operating in secret government operatives, so they don't have to answer really to society about that, except in certain scenarios that I create for them when it's a fun moment of conflict. But it's important for me to have an element of commiseration between two characters who are searching for meaning and purpose. One of them very attuned to the paranormal, the other one having the paranormal sort of thrust upon them and having to realize that coming from a much more skeptical point of view, and Rose unfolds a lot of paranormal visions, and a lot of those are tied to her energy in Clara. And there's a reason why these two characters have sounded alike and are a mirror throughout the series to this point, because there is something that has been separating them prior to coming together. And so it's a bit of a cosmic force coming together, and there's a bit of magic and mysticism in that, and also Clara being very attuned to her past lives, Rose not being attuned to her past lives. When they come together, they understand something about each other that has to do with past lives, which is a very fun moment for me. It was such a fun moment for me to write, and also was a preoccupation of the Victorians as well.
That's very beautiful. Okay, I wish I could geek out and just ask you a bunch of questions about Romantic and Victorian literature, but I want to ask you actually about your process. So first of all, have you finished with the next book in this series, The Eternal Files?
Yes, I have, in fact. So it was always meant to be a trilogy. I will certainly continue these characters on into other things, but the Eterna Files as a series is a pretty specific trilogy. And so it's the creation of this department and a certain resolution of this department over 3 books. So the working title for the 3rd book is called The Eterna Solution, and that will be out this time next year. And so I am awaiting edits. My editor is ruthless and wonderful, and she is always right. And I get very long editorial letters, and I then set to work and tend to all the details. I'm a character-driven writer, and she's very much a structuralist, and so she really helps me. She very much helps me when I sort of go off the rails, when a character is going into just things that aren't necessarily driving the plot forward. Melissa helps me reroute to that. But I think...
Well, do you outline the book?
I do, sort of. Yeah, I try. I really try to outline. It never works out. I am the world's most avid pantser. Everything is right by the seat of the pants, and it's right what the characters are driving me towards. And at some points, I do have to pull that back. And I think the more that Melissa and I work together, I think the more she sort of lets my characters do what they need to do. But the more I'm trying to make sure that I am taking note of her structural preferences along the way, because the structure is deeply important to making the plot move. And so she's all, I absolutely, want to make sure that I'm not letting that side down, even if it's not always my strong suit. But
so what, when you're setting out to finish a book, how many, because one thing I always tell students, and I've written a lot of books, sometimes I always tell students is, if you know that you have 2 months to do 200 pages, and it means you need to, I make it easy like that. I say, if you have to do 200 pages in 2 months, then that means you need how many pages at the end of the month? And they say 100, and we get down to the fact that means that you need 25 at the end of this week, or else there is no book.
Yeah.
And so how do you keep on track, and how many words or pages, or how do you determine what you need to do in a given day or week?
Well, I do similarly to that. I have a similar process in terms of breaking down the time frame, knowing my general pace. If I can always do 500 words a day, even if I'm in the worst mood or feeling horrible, I can always do 500 words a day. My goal is always
in the middle of a scene. Do you go, or do you just stop like when you've reached about that much, or do you try to?
I will go as long as I have the time and the idea to go. So I try to just carve out chunks of time. I have several different freelance jobs, and they all afford me a certain amount of flexibility. And so I'm also able to travel a lot because I do a lot of public appearances. So I really, carving out the time is my foremost objective, and it doesn't have to be some luxuriant amount of time. Very often I don't have that. So I'll say, okay, all right, I'll stick to my 500 words if I have like half an hour, or I'll hit my 2,000 word goal if I have a couple of hours to go. And I'll just really try to make sure that I use that time accordingly. Once the characters are developed, it's a lot easier. First books are always very, very hard for me. And so once the characters are defined, they really help me tell the story, because I'll just sort of ask them questions or ponder them and ponder what they would be doing in a scenario, and then it will be sort of revealed to me. But I do not write in a linear fashion. I write chapter 1, chapter 5, chapter 25,
You
and
really?
I'll go back. I cannot write linear to save my life. There may be a book that tells itself to me in a linear fashion, and I will write it that way if it tells itself to me that way. But I write the scenes that I almost am called to write. Like, I look at my writing almost like a spiritualist might look at automatic writing. I'll go into a place where I just kind of let the characters speak through me, and I'm just the medium. And now I don't want that to sound like I'm a slave to a muse at all, because I have to turn it on. I always turn my books in on time. So, it's a matter of the muse and these characters, they work for me. And so I will make sure and push for that, the information to come through to me. And I'll be pushy on that count, but it really is somewhat mysterious in the ways in which it sort of transmutes and transforms from the ether onto the page. And then I try to craft it as I go. And I think as long as I keep putting my characters in precarious, dangerous situations and keep getting them back out of it, then that's how I hope that I keep the suspense going, which is my favorite, my favorite part of the genre is the suspense aspect.
I always think of it as being like an event horizon in a sense. Like, you sit down to do your session, and you're like kind of forcing it, just in the same way that an automatic writer will just be sweeping the chalk back and forth. And then all of a sudden there's like a catch, and you're sort of rolling towards the event horizon, and then you're in it, you're writing, and you don't look up again until you've done whatever it is, and you lose track of all semblance of actual passing time all of a sudden. But it takes it takes time to get to actually get over that horizon. That's the hard part, and carving out a little bit of time for yourself to actually do it is tough. Do you go anywhere special? Like, do you work at home, or whatever you're calling home at the moment, or do you go out to a coffee shop, or what?
I write wherever I can, basically, because I do travel a lot.
Or a laptop?
Yeah, a laptop, and it's just all I need. Honestly, there's a couple of things I need. I need an environment that is not obnoxiously loud.
Yeah.
I prefer to be I love the idea of writing at cafes. The problem is that the cafe is playing music with lyrics. I have a very hard time. So I prefer not to have headphones in, because it's almost too much in my actual head. I prefer to have atmosphere outside. So classical music is my go-to. So definitely if I'm at home or in a hotel room, I will have classical music playing on, like, constantly, just sort of 24/7. If I am in the car, that's also what I'm listening to, is classical music, because that's both what my characters would be familiar with, and that's some of their popular music, and also it's lyric free, so thusly I can save the words for my characters and me and our discussions together. And so I need a relatively quiet space, and sometimes the energy of being out at a cafe is exactly what I need for a change of pace. Because sometimes if you know how this goes, if you're at home and you're not necessarily feeling it, you'll clean something that you don't even want
to
clean.
putter
You'll
around.
do it because you putter, exactly. And so I'll get distracted a lot if I'm not careful. So sometimes I will change my setting, and sometimes I change my pace. But very often, I know that I won't get to that fugue state unless I sort of push myself, and I won't necessarily get to that state if I'm out.
Excellent phrase. I like the way you put that.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Stephen King, by the way, famously, King wrote in honest to God, his laundry room. In his trailer, I think it was, on an ironing board, which I just find fascinating. That he would.
I love that. I love that. I love that so much. Well, and I think people who think that there has to be some grand, glorious kind of routine about it, I think they're missing the point. Like, it's a job like any other job, and it's not necessarily glorious. You do it wherever you can, and you make it happen, and sometimes it's often in the most mundane of places and ways. But for me, as long as I have classical music and coffee, I am good. If I do not have coffee, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening without coffee. So it is my greatest vice, and it really is my gasoline. There's no going without it.
Outstanding. Gosh. Okay. So the book is Eterna and Omega, and it just came out, I think, like a month ago. So
correct.
Yeah, and Leanna Renee Hieber, it is so delightful to have talked to you about this gaslamp fantasy. People should totally check it out from Tor. They're inventing this genre and really making it sing. Later on, I will exchange messages with you about what exactly our favorite Victorian short stories are.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
I'm serious. We can talk. Yeah. I mean, anytime you want to talk about this stuff, I will geek out with you for hours about this stuff. This is, I am not kidding. I have been writing books set in the 1880s since I was 11 years old. This has been a lifelong passion. So this is, so anytime you want to talk Victorian craziness, you let me know. Done.
All right. Thank you so much, Eterna and Omega. Everybody needs to check it out. You have a website, by the way.
I do.
LeannaReneeHieber.com. Hieber. Leanna Renee Hieber. So everybody should go check it out. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye.